The sound of little feet echoed through the small house in Gary, Indiana. It was 1968, and 5-year-old Michael Jackson stood in front of a cracked mirror, watching his older brothers rehearse. His eyes followed every movement, every spin, every snap of their fingers. He didn't know it then, but childhood was already slipping through his tiny hands like sand through an hourglass. While other children his age played with toys and scraped their knees on playgrounds, Michael was learning dance steps that would one day mesmerize millions. But there was a price for this gift, a cost that would echo through every year of his life. Joseph Jackson, his father, was a steel mill worker with dreams bigger than the Rust Belt town could contain. He saw something in his children that went beyond the ordinary, and he was determined to pull it out of them, no matter what it took. The rehearsals were brutal. Hours stretched into the night as small bodies moved to rhythms that pounded through the walls. When a step was missed, when a note went flat, consequences followed. Michael learned early that perfection wasn't optional. It was survival. The leather belt his father wore wasn't just an accessory. It was a reminder that greatness came with pain, that the world wouldn't wait for weakness, that softness was something they couldn't afford. But Michael was soft. Beneath the performing smile and the precise movements lived a boy who collected spiders in jars because he thought they were misunderstood. He whispered to animals and believed they understood him. He watched other children through windows as they played games he would never join. His brothers were tougher, harder around the edges. They could shake off their father's harsh words and move forward. Michael absorbed everything. Every criticism carved itself into his memory. Every moment of anger became a scar he would carry forever. The Jackson 5 exploded onto the scene when Michael was just 11 years old. Suddenly, this child from Gary was performing on television, singing songs that climbed the charts, hearing screams from crowds that stretched beyond what his young eyes could comprehend. He should have felt joy. He should have felt pride. Instead, he felt the weight of 1,000 expectations pressing down on shoulders that were still growing. Between recording sessions and performances, other children were learning multiplication tables and making friends at recess. Michael was learning how to smile for cameras when he was exhausted, how to hit high notes when his voice wanted to crack, how to be perfect when he just wanted to be a kid. The hotels became his classroom. The tour buses became his playground. The stage became the only place where he felt truly alive, yet it was also the place where his childhood was sacrificed piece by piece. He watched through limousine windows as children rode bicycles and played basketball in driveways. He pressed his small hand against the glass, wondering what that freedom felt like. His brothers sometimes complained about the grueling schedule, but they had memories of a time before fame. Michael barely remembered anything else. This was his normal. This was all he knew. At night, in hotel rooms across America, Michael would lie awake listening to the sounds of the city below. He wondered if there was a boy somewhere out there his age, sleeping peacefully without worrying about hitting the right note tomorrow or executing the perfect spin. He wondered what it felt like to fail without consequences, to make mistakes without disappointing thousands. These thoughts haunted him in the darkness. Even then, before the world knew his name as a solo artist, before the moonwalk and Thriller, before everything that would make him the biggest star the world had ever seen, Michael Jackson was already lonely. He was already searching for something he had lost before he even knew he had it. His gentleness was being shaped by forces too harsh, too demanding, too hungry for perfection. And the boy behind the music was slowly learning that the world wanted his talent, but it didn't necessarily want his heart. The transition from boy to man usually happens gradually, in quiet moments and through natural growth. For Michael Jackson, it happened under spotlights, in recording studios, and across magazine covers that documented every subtle change in his appearance. By the time he turned 21, he had already lived several lifetimes in the public eye. The world had watched him grow up, and now it was watching him transform into something they had never seen before. His solo career was about to explode in ways that would redefine what it meant to be a superstar, but the cost of this transformation would be measured in pieces of his humanity that he could never get back. The album Off the Wall in 1979 showed the world that Michael Jackson wasn't just a child star who got lucky. He was an artist with vision, with passion, with an understanding of music that seemed to come from somewhere ancient and untouchable. The record sold millions, earned critical praise, and established him as a force beyond the Jackson 5. But Michael wasn't satisfied. Satisfaction wasn't part of his programming. His father had wired him to always reach higher, to never settle, to never believe he was good enough. So when Off the Wall didn't win the Grammy for Album of the Year, something inside Michael hardened. The rejection felt personal, as if the world was saying his best still wasn't enough. That pain became fuel. That disappointment became determination. He disappeared into the studio with producer Quincy Jones, and what emerged would change music history forever. Thriller wasn't just an album. It was a cultural earthquake. Released in 1982, it became the best-selling album of all time, a record it still holds decades later. The music videos weren't just promotional tools. They were cinematic events that transformed MTV and made music visual in ways no one had imagined. The Moonwalk, performed on television during Motown's anniversary special, became a moment frozen in time. Millions of people around the world tried to recreate that backwards glide, that impossible smoothness. Michael had become more than a musician. He had become a phenomenon. But phenomena aren't treated like people. They are treated like property, like products, like things to be consumed and analyzed and picked apart. Michael's face appeared on every magazine, every television screen, every billboard. His every move was documented, discussed, debated. The world became obsessed with understanding him, with categorizing him, with owning pieces of him. And Michael, who had always been gentle, who had always been sensitive, who had always felt things more deeply than others, began to crack under the pressure. He started changing his appearance. His nose became thinner. His skin became lighter. The world speculated endlessly about why, creating theories that ranged from reasonable to absurd. But the truth was simpler and sadder than most people wanted to believe. Michael looked in the mirror and saw his father's face. He saw the person who had hurt him, who had called him ugly, who had mocked his appearance during those brutal childhood rehearsals. Joseph had once told him his nose was too big, that his skin wasn't right, that he wasn't handsome enough. Those words, spoken to a vulnerable child, became knives that cut deeper with every passing year. So Michael tried to erase what he saw. He tried to become something different, something that wouldn't remind him of the pain. The plastic surgeries weren't about vanity. They were about escape. They were about trying to construct a face that didn't carry the weight of childhood trauma. But each change made the world more curious, more judgmental, more convinced that something was wrong with him. The isolation grew thicker. Michael built Neverland Ranch, a sprawling property filled with amusement park rides, exotic animals, and everything a child could dream of having. It was his attempt to create the childhood he never experienced, to build a safe space where innocence could exist away from the harsh glare of fame. He invited underprivileged children to visit, wanting to share joy with those who had little. But even this kindness would later be twisted and used against him. The world looked at Neverland and saw strangeness. They looked at Michael's gentleness and saw something suspicious. They couldn't understand that some souls remain childlike not because they are strange, but because they were never allowed to be children when it mattered. His music continued to break barriers. Bad in 1987 produced 5 #1 singles. Dangerous in 1991 pushed creative boundaries. But Michael was becoming increasingly uncomfortable in his own skin, in his own life, in his own fame. He wore masks and disguises in public, trying to experience normalcy for just a few moments. He spoke in a soft, almost whispered voice that many mocked, not understanding that this gentleness was authentic, that Michael had never developed the hard edges most people use to protect themselves from the world. He was succeeding beyond measure while simultaneously disappearing into a loneliness that fame had created. The world wanted the king of pop, but Michael Jackson just wanted to be understood. The year 1993 arrived like a storm that had been gathering on a distant horizon, invisible until it was too late to seek shelter. Michael Jackson stood at the absolute peak of fame, a height so dizzying that the fall would be catastrophic. He had spent his entire life giving the world his music, his innovation, his heart. Now the world was about to take something from him that he could never recover, his innocence in the eyes of millions. The accusations came suddenly, violently, publicly. A 13-year-old boy claimed Michael had acted inappropriately with him. The news exploded across every media outlet. Headlines screamed. Television shows dissected every detail. The gentle man who had built a ranch for children, who had dedicated songs to healing the world, who had donated millions to charity, was now being painted as a monster. Michael was devastated in ways that went beyond words. This wasn't like a bad review or a failed album. This was an attack on his character, on the very essence of who he believed himself to be. His relationship with children had always been pure in his mind. He saw in them the innocence he had lost, the joy that had been stolen from him. He wanted to protect that innocence, to give them experiences of wonder and magic. But the world, trained to see darkness in everything, couldn't accept that Michael's intentions might actually be as simple and genuine as he claimed. The speculation became a feeding frenzy. Former associates came forward with stories. Tabloids paid enormous sums for any information, true or false. The presumption of innocence that supposedly protected everyone in society seemed to evaporate when it came to Michael Jackson. The investigation was brutal. Police raided Neverland, photographing Michael's body to compare with descriptions provided by the accuser. This humiliation, this violation of privacy, was broadcast to the world. Michael, who had always been intensely private about his body, who had struggled with his appearance his entire life, was now being exposed in the most degrading way possible. He was on tour when the accusations became public, performing to sold-out crowds while his world crumbled behind the scenes. The stress manifested physically. He became dependent on painkillers, originally prescribed for legitimate medical issues but now serving as an escape from the psychological torture he was enduring. His weight dropped. His performances, usually flawless, began to suffer. The case never went to trial. Michael settled with the accuser's family for a reported $23 million. To the world, this looked like an admission of guilt. To Michael's supporters, it was a pragmatic decision to end a nightmare that was destroying him. The truth, as always, was more complicated. Michael's advisors told him that fighting the case could drag on for years, that it would consume his life, that the media circus would never end. The settlement included no admission of wrongdoing, but it didn't matter. Public opinion had already rendered its verdict. Some people stood by him, refusing to believe the accusations without proof. Others were convinced of his guilt, seeing the settlement as confirmation. Most people landed somewhere in the confused middle, unsure what to believe but uncomfortable with the questions that lingered. Michael's relationship with fame changed forever after 1993. The innocence was gone. The trust was shattered. He had spent his entire life being used by others, from his father who pushed him into stardom as a child to the industry that commodified his talent to the media that now gleefully destroyed his reputation for ratings. He had given everything to a world that now seemed determined to break him. His music became darker, more defensive. The album History, released in 1995, included songs that screamed his pain and anger. Tracks like Scream and They Don't Care About Us weren't just music. They were therapy sessions put to beats, raw expressions of a wounded soul trying to fight back against forces that seemed infinite. He married Lisa Marie Presley, daughter of Elvis, in a union that many dismissed as a publicity stunt but which people close to them insisted was genuine. Michael was seeking connection, seeking someone who might understand the unique prison that fame creates. Lisa Marie had grown up in the shadow of the world's most famous entertainer before Michael. She understood the isolation, the suspicion, the way normal life becomes impossible when you're that famous. But the marriage couldn't survive the weight of Michael's damaged reputation and the constant scrutiny. They divorced less than 2 years later. Michael then married Debbie Rowe, a dermatology nurse who gave him 2 children, Prince and Paris. These children became his anchor, his reason to continue fighting when everything else seemed pointless. But the accusations had opened a door that would never fully close. In 2003, new allegations emerged. Another young boy claimed inappropriate behavior. This time, Michael would face trial. The world watched as the king of pop was fingerprinted, photographed, and arraigned like a common criminal. The trial in 2005 was a media spectacle that lasted months. Every day, cameras captured Michael arriving at the courthouse, sometimes in pajama bottoms because he had been hospitalized, always looking frail and defeated. The prosecution painted him as a predatory figure. The defense argued he was a victim of families seeking financial gain from a wealthy, vulnerable celebrity. Witnesses on both sides presented conflicting stories. The jury deliberated and returned with a verdict, not guilty on all counts. Michael was acquitted, but he wasn't freed. The damage was permanent. Large portions of the public would never see him the same way again. His reputation was in ruins. His finances, once astronomical, had been depleted by legal fees and bad investments. The Neverland Ranch, his sanctuary, was tainted by the investigation and trial. He would never live there again. Michael Jackson had survived the legal system, but he hadn't survived the court of public opinion. The gentleness that had defined him was now seen as evidence of something sinister rather than as a reflection of a wounded soul trying to hold on to innocence in a cruel world. After the trial, Michael Jackson became a ghost haunting the edges of the fame that had once defined him. He left America, unable to bear the weight of the stares and whispers that followed him everywhere. He wandered through Bahrain, Ireland, various locations where he thought he might find peace, but peace had become a foreign concept. The man who had once commanded stages with supernatural confidence now seemed fragile, uncertain, as if the foundation beneath him had turned to sand. His financial situation deteriorated rapidly. Neverland Ranch, that symbol of his attempt to reclaim childhood, was slipping away from him. The ride stopped moving. The animals were relocated. The property that had once echoed with laughter and music fell silent, becoming a monument to dreams that had died. His children, Prince, Paris, and Blanket, became his entire world. Michael had always wanted to be a father, to give his children the love and gentleness he had never received from his own father. He kept their faces covered in public, using masks and veils to protect them from the cameras that had destroyed his own childhood. People mocked this behavior, calling it bizarre and overprotective, not understanding that Michael was desperately trying to give his children something he had never had: privacy, normalcy, a chance to grow up without the world watching their every move. In private, he was tender with them, reading stories, teaching them about music and art, showing them a gentleness that contradicted everything the media had said about him. But his physical and mental health continued to decline. The chronic pain from years of intense dancing and injuries had never fully healed. He relied on prescription medications to function, to sleep, to cope with the psychological damage that decades of pressure had inflicted. His appearance had changed dramatically over the years, becoming almost ethereal, otherworldly. Some saw this as evidence of his strangeness. Others recognized it as the physical manifestation of a soul that had been pushed beyond human limits. He was becoming translucent, as if he was slowly fading from the physical world because he no longer fully belonged to it. The music industry had moved on. New artists dominated the charts. The innovative sounds that Michael had pioneered were now standard, making his contributions seem less revolutionary to younger audiences who had grown up taking them for granted. He hadn't released a studio album of new material since 2001's Invincible, and even that had been overshadowed by his legal troubles and bizarre public behavior. The label disputes, the changing music landscape, and his own reluctance to return to the spotlight all contributed to his artistic silence. Michael Jackson, who had once been the most famous person on the planet, was becoming a cautionary tale, a reminder of how fame could destroy even the most talented. In 2009, desperate for money and perhaps seeking redemption, Michael announced a series of comeback concerts at the O2 Arena in London. The shows were called This Is It, a title that resonated with unintended prophecy. 50 concerts were scheduled, an enormous undertaking for a performer in his 50s who hadn't toured in over a decade. The tickets sold out within hours, proving that despite everything, millions still loved Michael Jackson, still wanted to see him perform, still believed in the magic he could create on stage. For Michael, these concerts represented a chance to remind the world why he had become the king of pop in the first place, to perform the music that had defined generations, to reclaim his throne. But his body was failing him. The rehearsals were exhausting. He struggled with the choreography that had once been second nature. His weight had dropped to a dangerous level. Friends and associates who saw him during this period were alarmed by his appearance, by his obvious frailty, by the fact that he seemed to be running on willpower alone. He couldn't sleep without medication. The anxiety about the performances, the pressure to be perfect after so many years away, the financial desperation that drove him to accept such a punishing schedule, all of it combined into a toxic mix that was slowly killing him. Dr. Conrad Murray, a cardiologist, had been hired as Michael's personal physician. Murray was administering propofol, a powerful anesthetic used in surgical settings, to help Michael sleep. This was dangerous, reckless, a gross violation of medical ethics. Propofol requires careful monitoring and should never be used outside a hospital setting. But Michael was desperate for sleep, for escape from the anxiety that plagued him, and Murray was willing to provide what Michael wanted. Night after night, Michael was put under with propofol, drifting into an unconscious state that wasn't true rest but rather a chemical erasure of consciousness. It was only a matter of time before something went terribly wrong. On June 25, 2009, Michael Jackson died in his rented mansion in Los Angeles. Dr. Murray had administered propofol and left Michael unattended. When he returned, Michael wasn't breathing. The attempts to revive him failed. The king of pop was dead at 50 years old. The news spread across the world at lightning speed. Websites crashed from the traffic. Television programming was interrupted. Social media, still relatively new, was overwhelmed with the outpouring of grief and shock. Michael Jackson, who had been mocked and ridiculed in his final years, was suddenly remembered as a genius, as an innovator, as an irreplaceable talent whose contributions to music and culture were immeasurable. The irony was cruel and obvious. In death, Michael received the love and respect that had been denied to him in his final years of life. The memorial service at the Staples Center in Los Angeles drew thousands, with millions more watching around the world. His children, their faces finally revealed to the public, spoke through tears about the father they had lost. Paris Jackson, just 11 years old, stood at the microphone and said words that broke hearts worldwide. "Ever since I was born, Daddy has been the best father you could ever imagine. And I just wanted to say I love him so much." The world suddenly remembered that behind the tabloid headlines and the bizarre behavior was a man who had been a father, a son, a human being with feelings and dreams and pain. The world struggled to make sense of Michael Jackson's death. How could someone so famous, so talented, so seemingly invincible simply be gone? But those who had paid attention saw the truth. Michael hadn't died suddenly. He had been dying slowly for years, eroded by fame that started too early, by pressure that never relented, by accusations that destroyed his spirit, by loneliness that fame created and then magnified. His death was the final chapter in a story that had been written from the moment a small boy stood in front of a mirror in Gary, Indiana, learning dance steps instead of playing with friends. The tragedy wasn't just that Michael Jackson died at 50. The tragedy was that the gentle soul inside him had been dying since childhood. Dr. Conrad Murray was convicted of involuntary manslaughter for his role in Michael's death. He served less than 2 years in prison, a sentence that many felt was inadequate for the loss of such an enormous talent. But punishing Murray didn't bring Michael back, didn't heal the wounds that fame had created, didn't answer the deeper questions about how society treats its superstars. Michael's death forced a reckoning with the way we consume celebrities, the way we build them up only to tear them down, the way we expect perfection while simultaneously punishing anyone who seems too perfect. The media outlets that had gleefully reported every scandal, every bizarre behavior, every accusation, suddenly published glowing tributes, conveniently forgetting their role in his suffering. His music experienced a massive resurgence. Thriller re-entered the charts. His greatest hits albums sold millions of copies. A new generation discovered his artistry, watching the music videos and performances that had defined an era. The moonwalk was analyzed and celebrated. The humanitarian work he had done, the hundreds of millions donated to charity, the hospitals and schools he had funded, all of this was suddenly remembered and honored. It was as if the world had collectively decided to forgive Michael for the sin of being human, for having flaws alongside his genius, for struggling under pressure that would have crushed anyone. But this forgiveness came too late for the man who had needed it while he was alive. The debate about the accusations continued even after death. New documentaries and reports would emerge in later years, presenting conflicting narratives about Michael's relationships with children. Some presented him as a predator who had escaped justice. Others argued he was a victim of extortion and media hysteria. The truth became increasingly difficult to determine, lost in a fog of contradictory testimonies, financial motivations, and the impossibility of knowing what really happened behind closed doors. What remained undeniable was that Michael's gentleness, his childlike nature, his refusal to develop the hard protective shell that most celebrities cultivate, made him vulnerable in ways that others weren't. His children grew up in the public eye despite his efforts to protect them. Paris Jackson became a model and actress, openly discussing her struggles with depression and the trauma of losing her father so young. Prince became more private, focusing on business and philanthropy. Blanket, who later went by Bye Guy, largely stayed out of the spotlight. All three carried the weight of their father's legacy, the burden of being Michael Jackson's children in a world that would never let them forget who their father was. They defended his memory when new accusations arose, insisting that the man they knew was loving and gentle, nothing like the monster some tried to portray. Neverland Ranch, that symbol of Michael's attempt to reclaim innocence, changed hands multiple times after his death. The rides were removed, the zoo disbanded, the magic erased. It became just another property, stripped of the meaning Michael had tried to give it. But the idea of Neverland, the concept of a place where childhood could be protected and preserved, remained powerful. Michael had been trying to tell the world something with Neverland, trying to show that innocence was worth protecting, that gentleness was valuable, that the childlike wonder we're taught to outgrow is actually something precious that shouldn't be lost. The world looked at Neverland and saw strangeness. Michael looked at it and saw sanctuary. The estate that Michael left behind was complicated and valuable. His music catalog, his image rights, and his partial ownership of the Beatles catalog through Sony ATV Music Publishing were worth hundreds of millions. The executors worked to restore financial stability, negotiating deals and releasing posthumous projects. This Is It, a documentary made from rehearsal footage of the concerts that never happened, became one of the highest-grossing concert films ever. Cirque du Soleil created shows celebrating his music. Broadway considered productions. Michael Jackson the brand was more valuable dead than the troubled man had been alive, another cruel irony in a life full of them. What remains, beyond the controversy and the tabloid headlines and the unanswered questions, is the music. Michael Jackson created a body of work that transcended genre, race, and generation. He didn't just make popular music. He created art that moved people, that made them feel emotions they couldn't name, that brought joy to millions. The dancing, the singing, the innovation, the risks he took artistically, all of it changed the landscape of popular culture forever. Artists who came after him built on foundations he laid. The music videos he created turned MTV into a cultural force. The concerts he performed set standards that others still try to meet. But perhaps his most important legacy is the cautionary tale his life represents. Michael Jackson showed the world what happens when we take a gentle soul and subject it to the meat grinder of fame. We took a child with extraordinary talent and turned him into a commodity, then expressed shock when the pressure destroyed him. We demanded perfection and punished him when he fell short. We built him up as a deity and then gleefully participated in his crucifixion when his humanity showed through. His story asks uncomfortable questions about what we expect from our celebrities, about the price of entertainment, about whether some people are too gentle for the harsh world of fame. Michael Jackson wanted to heal the world, to make it a better place, to use his platform for good. He wrote songs about unity, about protecting the environment, about helping children. He genuinely believed that music could change things, that love could overcome hatred, that his gentle spirit could make a difference. The world took that gentleness and twisted it, questioned it, used it against him. In the end, Michael Jackson was a soul too gentle for the fame that raised him, too sensitive for the spotlight that burned him, too human for the godlike status we tried to force upon him. He gave us everything he had, and we took it all. When there was nothing left to take, when he had been consumed completely by the fame machine, he simply ceased to exist. His grave is at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale, California. Fans still visit, leaving flowers and notes and tokens of appreciation. They come from all over the world to pay respects to a man they never met but who touched their lives through his art. The music plays on. The videos still inspire. The moonwalk is still attempted by dancers everywhere. Michael Jackson is gone, but the impact of his life, both the triumphs and the tragedies, continues to echo through our culture. His story is a reminder that behind every famous face is a human being with pain and dreams and vulnerabilities. It's a reminder to be kinder, to judge less harshly, to remember that gentleness is not weakness and that sometimes the brightest stars burn out the fastest because we demand too much light from them. Michael gave us his light until there was none left, and now we live in a world dimmed by his absence, forever changed by a soul that was too gentle for the fame that raised him.